Armin, these are Sunni scholars. You know, Shia Islam is the true Islam. Was different. Sure. 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 Then Allah is the dumbest God who have ever been a God that we could destroy Islam with. And that's why you need to be able to understand this and argue this very well. Married a 6-year-old and had sex with her when she was 9. But if you actually look at the Quran, you can have sex with a child way before that. Way before that. All right. Hi, everyone. So this is going to be a member-only live stream. So some of you are going to watch this later. And I know this is not going to be as busy as our other live streams because it's member-only. I want you guys to see specifically how the Quran, again, not the Hadith, is very important for you to realize this. The Quran specifically endorses child marriage. This is something that a lot of people don't know, even a lot of Muslims. Every time we're talking about child marriage in Islam, everybody goes and talks about Muhammad's experience with Aisha. And the issue with that is that that's from the Hadith. And I know the Hadith, it comes from authentic Hadith. It comes from Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and also Shia Hadith is filled with child marriage. However, Hadith has still, some people can still pretend like this is not the core part of Islam, even though they're lying, even though either they don't understand Islam or they're lying about Islam. The problem with that narrative is that the Quran itself endorses child marriage, and it does it in a much more horrific way than Hadith does. So, for people who might not know what I'm talking about, Islamic teaching has the two main sources. It's either the Quran or is the Sunnah. So the Quran is a direct revelation from God, and the Sunnah is the way of what Muhammad did and say, his way of life, basically using him as a role model. These are the two sources. And when it comes to the Sunnah, the way of the Prophet, the main source of that is the Hadith. And Hadith has to recognize what Hadith is true and what Hadith is not true. There is an entire Islamic methodology when it comes to evaluating that. And when it comes to when a hadith is recognized by major Islamic school of thought as to for it to be authentic, they stamp it with Sahih. And the main two authentic sources are Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. So according to Hadith itself, Muhammad had married a child and had sex with a child. That is according to Sahih Hadith. However, still, because that's not in the Quran and it's in the Hadith, some Muslims try to use that as a way to dismiss that, especially reformist Muslims or modern Muslims, because they say there's nothing in the Quran that allows it. The problem with that is that the Quran actually does talk about child marriage, but it does it in 3 different verses, and you have to connect these 3 verses to be able to get that. And that's what makes it so many Muslims even don't know about this, because it doesn't specifically mention it. Like, unless you put these 3 verses together, you would not understand that the Quran is endorsing child marriage. And it's actually worse than the Hadith, because if you look at the Hadith, Muhammad married a 6-year-old, right, and had sex with her when she was 9. But if you actually look at the Quran, you can have sex with a child way before that. Way before that. So not only that the Quran endorses child marriage, it's actually worse than what Muhammad did. So I'm going to put these 3 verses together for you guys to see what I'm talking about. We have to introduce people with the concept of Idda. Idda is the period of 3 months or 3 periods. All right. So this is not Surah Al-Talaq. This is Surah Al-Baqarah. So ignore this thing at the very top left. That's an error. This is the Quran chapter 2, verse 228, okay? 228. This is the first sentence is all you need to care about for now, right? And you understand what it's saying here. So, right? So if a woman divorces a man and wants to remarry, she has to wait 3 periods or 3 months. This is the concept of idda introduced by the Quran. which means the whole point. I mean, I'm sure it existed before the Quran, but the Quran is putting a stamp of approval on it. Okay, so if you get divorced, you might be pregnant and you don't know it. We need to make sure. It was very important. Lineage was very important to Arabs. I mean, it was very important to most people back then, right? It was important to know if you're pregnant, whose child it is, which man does this child belong to. So if you just divorce the man and remarry right away, there's going to be an issue. Maybe you don't know that you're pregnant and you had sex with the previous man, and now you had the sex with a new man, with your new husband, and now you're pregnant. And now the problem is you don't know if this child belongs to the previous husband that you divorced or to the current husband. So just to be safe, if you are divorcing a man, you need to wait 3 months to see if you are going to miss a period or something. So to know that you're not pregnant, and now you know whose child it is if you are pregnant. Okay. If you miss a period before you marry the next man, you know it was the previous husband's child. But if you don't miss a period and then you marry and now you're pregnant, you know it's the second husband, new husband's child. So this whole waiting period is just to make sure that we know whose child this is, right? So now this is, everyone got it? The child belongs to which husband, right? Pretty simple. Okay. You're with me? You're with me? Okay. Now let's go to the second verse, right? So the second verse that we're talking about is this one, 33, chapter 33, verse 49. And this is key. This is the key in the middle verse. It says, "Oh, you who have believed, when you marry believing women and then divorce them before you have touched them, i.e., consummated the marriage, then there is not for you any waiting period to count concerning them." So you see the clarification. So this verse was talking about you have to wait for 3 months before you remarry somebody. This verse is saying actually there is an exception. If you have had not sex with them, then you don't need to wait the 3 months period. So if you are married to a woman and she divorces you, she doesn't have to wait 3 months or three periods to remarry another man, because there's no point. Why should we wait? I never had sex with her. She never had sex during this marriage. So we know that if there's a child, it's going to be from the second husband, right? So if you didn't have sex with her during your marriage, no need to wait for 3 months. She could marry right away, immediately. Okay, pretty clear. So this is the last verse, and this is where it gets very disgusting. Okay, so this is talking about the wives that you have divorced, and it's cutting them into three parts. That means a 3 months period is prescribed to three different categories of women, right? So now the same concept that was introduced to you in the first verse, and in the second verse, it gave you an exception, and now it's cutting the woman that you're divorcing into three different categories and coming up with the EDDA prescription for them, right? So this verse is now explaining which women's you need to have the EDDA for. There's three types of women. And those who no longer expect menstruation among your women, if you doubt, then their period is 3 months. So category one are the women they're no longer having their period, meaning they're too old. They're too old to have their period. So now the second category. And also for those who have not menstruated, we will get back to this. And third category, and for those who are pregnant, their term is until they give birth. So it says there's three types of women that you're divorcing. Either the ones who are too old to have period, those women, then wait. So there's normal women that you already have a prescription for what you have to do with them. There's the prescription for them is clear. But what about women who don't even have period? They're at their waiting period, like they're too old to have their period. Their EDDA is 3 months as well. Just wait, just to be sure. You don't know, okay? And the last one are the ones who are pregnant. So for them, you just wait until they give birth. But the middle category is what we're interested here interested in here. And those who have not menstruated, meaning those women who are too young to have their period. So there's two things happening here. Women who have not yet had their menstruation, meaning children. Remember, these are three categories of women who you are divorcing, meaning that they are married. And the middle category are women who haven't yet, so-called women, who haven't had their period yet. So right off the bat, you could notice that if the Quran is endorsing, giving you instructions for what to do with children that you're divorcing, it's already assuming that marrying children is a-okay. Let me know if you're not clear with me here, okay? If the Quran is giving you a prescription for what to do for children that you're divorcing, it means that it's assuming that you're marrying children. But so some people might think that, okay, this is marriage. Marriage doesn't necessarily mean sex. Because if you remember, Muhammad married Aisha when she was 6, but he didn't have sex with her until she was 9. So you might say that, okay, these are women that you have married, that they are before the age that they have had their period. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they had sex with him. The husband might have just married her symbolically and the sex comes later. However, if you remember the verse before, the waiting period was not required if you have not touched them, if you have not consummated the marriage. So here, when it says the waiting period for women who haven't had their period yet, also for those who have not yet menstruated, when it says that their waiting period for them is 3 months, is with the understanding that you have had sex with them, that you have consummated the marriage. So that's why the second verse is so important to understand. Here's another point to remember. A lot of people who want to defend Islam, they keep on saying that, you know what, there's no age of marriage. It's basically based on when they're matured enough, when they are ready for pregnancy, when they reach adulthood. And they say, like, okay, back then people reach adulthood faster, which is nonsense. Back, they say Arabs, I don't know, it was the weather or whatever they say. It's all nonsense. It's all unscientific. But even if that was true, the Quran is actually now contradicting that, because they're saying that when you have your period, you are now ready for marriage and sex. So they say the reason why Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old is because she just matured faster, and there's no specific age that Islam teaches you as the age that is ready for sex. They say that it's basically based on puberty, and puberty based on menstruation, based on when you have your period. However, this Quranic verse shows that not even that is true. This is actually more evil than what Muhammad did. This Quranic verse is showing that even it's actually worse than even that standard. So a lot of Muslims say, like, listen, we think it's okay to have sex with somebody after they had their period, even if that age is 9. That is disgusting. However, this Quranic verse is saying, like, no, you could do it even before that. Do you see how much more vile this is than even what Muhammad, the teaching that comes from the Quran is actually worse than even Muhammad's relationship with Aisha. Yeah, exactly. Zayd is saying if there isn't sex, that wouldn't be necessary. Is everyone? I want to make sure everyone is clear, because this is putting these three verses together is a very powerful weapon that we have, because there's no excuses for this. This is Islam's weakest point. Like, nobody in the modern world, like most people in the modern world, would not accept this. If these three verses are like 3 nails that we could destroy Islam with. And that's why you need to be able to understand this and argue this very well and put this together. I want to make sure that you guys completely understand this, so that we work on this with each other, so that we could educate everyone on it. Right? So I'm testing it with you guys. Here's another thing that these people now try to do to defend this. This one, the second part, this is what we want to focus on. People who try to defend this, make excuses for it, try to change the definition of what this means, right? This one has unanimously being understood by Islamic scholars as women who are I say women because they say women, but these are not women, these are children, right? I'm just speaking from their perspective. Unanimously understood by scholars to be meaning children, meaning women who have not yet menstruated. Okay. However, reformist modern Islamic interpreters are trying to act like this means something else. We should not let them do that, because for the entirety of the history of Islamic scholarship by native Arab speakers and every other scholars, this was understood to mean children. I mean, not children. I mean, I say children. They would say women who have not yet menstruated, right? Or they were too young to have their menstruation. Let's actually go and see what the reformers have to say for what this means. Modern views and perspectives on the meaning of Quran 65:4. These are in contradiction with the already existing Islamic schools of thought, both Sunni and Shia. All four Sunni Islamic schools of thought understood that to be meaning women who are too young to have their menstruation. But let's actually see what they are saying here. Some modern Dava who decry the traditional sources and endorsing pedophilia often take issues with the interpretation of the wording of Quran Surah 65, verse 4. Okay, in these sources, yeah, in this source. So, okay, so I'm not going to get into too much detail, but their understanding, if you want to go look all of this up, they're trying to say that nikah means marriage, and basically marriage is for adults, and because marriage means for adults, this must be an adult. These are specifically unique type of women that have reached adulthood, but because of certain conditions they haven't had their period yet. This is a modern understanding of this Quranic verse. So let's consider that there's two possibilities. Either the Quran was talking about women who are too young to have their period, or the Quran was not talking about women who are too young to have their period. That's not a false dichotomy. It's either is that or is not that. Okay. Which one do you think is more likely? If it's true that the Quran actually wasn't talking about children, actually wasn't talking about women who are too young, then Allah is the dumbest God who have ever been a god. Okay. Like in the history of godhood, there is no dumber God than Allah, because it's so obvious that everybody would interpret it like that. There is, as people have been interpreting it like that for the entirety of Islamic scholarship, again, by native Arab speakers, scholars that are native Arab speakers. Like, what do you think an average reader would think when you said woman, when you're divorcing women who haven't had their period? What do you think they would assume you're talking about? The best you could say about God, Allah, is that he's a moron that doesn't know how to write and how to speak. The worst is that he actually is talking about children who haven't had their period. And the proof of that is the tafsir. So a Muslim might come and say that, I mean, all of the, what is tafsir? Tafsir are the commentaries on the Quran. So Islamic scholars will read the Quran and they will interpret it, and that interpretation and the commentary is called tafsir. So some Muslim who wants to defend this Quranic verses like, Armin, the source of tafsir are humans. The Quran, the Quran itself comes from God. The tafsir comes from humans. So if you read the tafsir, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Quran meant what the tafsir says. Yeah, but if that's true, if there is a God, but which there's not, the tafsir shows that the verse that Quran that God said sent to people, how was it interpreted by the people who speak that language, who have studied, who had made their life's work to study the text, the Quranic text, and they understand Arabic more than even Arabs, like they're scholars in Arabic, in speaking Arabic. And how have they consistently understood this verse? So even though this is a human interpretation, what is the point of the Quranic verse if once you sent it to mankind, this is how it would be perceived? I mean, effectively, the perception of that verse is the effect that that verse is going to have. If I sent you a message to mankind asking them to do something good, but every single person that read it misunderstood what I'm saying and did something evil with that message, right? The effective result of me sending that message is something evil, because it doesn't really matter what my intentions were anymore. You have to pragmatically, if I want to evaluate what this verse does, the intention of the God doesn't matter. The intention, the verse acts in the same way with the as a verse with the intention that is telling people to rape children. Do you understand what I'm saying? So now let's look at the tafsirs and see what the tafsirs have said. By the way, it's pretty obvious what the Quran is talking about. Like, think about the argument people are making. The Quran is talking about adults. Like, what is more likely? What is more common in society? Right? So you're talking about three types of women. Women who, the first one was women who their menopause. They don't have their period anymore. Okay, that's common. That happens. What is the third category? Women who are pregnant. Last time I checked, that's a common thing that happens. I don't know if you guys noticed, but women do get pregnant quite often, right? That's a common thing. And all of a sudden, these reformists are acting like the second category is this unusual thing that happens in very rare cases. Why are other rare cases not mentioned? Why is when the Quran talking about, like, when the Quran is talking about all sorts of other treating your wife, when it comes to inheritance, when it comes to testimony, when it comes to so many other things, when it comes to biological claims, it talks about worldly things that have effect on so many people. It doesn't talk about very rare conditions. If it was going to talk about rare conditions, it would have to be 100 times bigger than it is, because why this specific rare condition is something that you're worried about, but not other rare conditions. So it's more likely that the Quran is giving you guidance about what to do with common affairs. When you say women who have not had their period yet, like, of course you're talking about women who are too young to have their period. It's the most likely explanation. But I'm saying this is what all of these sources of tafsir are saying. Look at this modern tafsir. Let's look at ancient tafsir, classical tafsirs first, and then go to modern ones, right? So when I'm saying like some reformers are trying to make excuses for these verses, I'm talking about very, very recently. Oh, here's another point. What are the chances that both modern tafsirs and classical tafsirs, they all understood this verse to mean women who are too young to have their period, right? Both modern and classical, because when we say modern, when I'm talking about reformers who have a different interpretation, we're talking like really recently. We're not talking about modern. Even modern tafsirs agree with the interpretation that I'm telling you, that these are talking about children. We're talking about a reformist movement that is quite recent, that happens to have a different interpretation of this verse right at the time that the world, with its higher moral standards, is now with the internet. Like, this is the age of internet. With the age of internet, and and social media, and people's access to Quranic verses and their translation and their interpretation, all of a sudden, that is exactly the point in time when now we have a new understanding of this verse. So think about this. Think about what these reformers are saying. The God, Allah.
Think about it. God? Is that it? Let me give you a little inside information about God.
Sent a guide for all mankind and all time to be followed. And for most time, everybody misunderstood this. But the specific time that these reformers came and are like, oh, oopsie, we have gotten this verse wrong. For the past 1400 years, we got this interpretation of this verse wrong. But right now, when humanity, independent from God, has gotten to a moral standard that understands that, hey, maybe sex with children is not good. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Okay, but not even then. Like, decades after that, like the rest of humanity was like, yeah, we shouldn't do this. Even then, that interpretation was not like, okay, this is not talking about children. It had to come with the internet and social media and people noticing how horrific these verses are. It's only then that all of a sudden some Muslims are like, oh my God, we got this verse wrong. Like, to suggest that this is a coincidence, that the timing of it, look at how big of a failure this verse is. Islam has been around for 1400 years. Muslim got it wrong for 1400 years. The past decade, less than the decade. The past decade, only Muslims realize after non-Muslims realize that sex with children is bad. After non-Muslims have been realizing sex with children is bad for multiple decades, when they now noticing your verses, now you're like, oh, then Muslims realize that this, not only that this is wrong, but the Quranic verses interpretation was different. Sure. But let's look at these classical tafsirs. This is the most famous one, okay? So if you know your tafsirs, you know that Ibn Kathir is the king in the tafsir world, right? Like, this is a guy. This is the guy that people go for the tafsirs. He is the main authority on this, right? So his interpretation of this verse is the iddah of those in menopause. Okay, so that was the first one. And those who do not have the menses, the period, Allah the Exalted clarifies the waiting period of the woman in menopause. Okay, that was the first category. And that is the one whose menstruations has stopped due to their old age. So Ibn Kathir is saying the first category is talking about women who are too old to have their period. Her iddah is 3 months instead of 3 months instead of 3 monthly cycles for those who menstruate. That's interesting. I wasn't paying attention to that, right? So these are 3 categories of women who, instead of 3 periods, because for other women they have 3 periods, but these women, you do 3 months instead of 3 periods. That's what. Okay, so sorry, let me actually clarify this. Thank you, Ibn Kathir, for reminding me of this, right? So for other women, other than these 3 categories, it's obvious that you wait 3 periods. 1 period when you have your period number 1, period number 2, period number 3. You're safe to now remarry. Okay, but these are 3 categories of women who don't have periods. So instead of waiting for their periods, you just wait for the first 2, you wait for their 3 months instead of 3 periods, and for the last one, you just wait until she gives birth. So thank you, Ibn Kathir, for clarifying that. Okay, her iddah is 3 months instead of 3 monthly cycles for those who menstruate, which is based on the ayah. Okay, so it's telling us the same. Here's what we wanted to know. Okay, the same for the young. Okay, so Ibn Kathir understands that we're talking about young who have not reached the years of menstruation. Okay, so remember, if you do not accept Ibn Kathir as a source of tafsir, then don't come to me and tell me what the scholars say, because we don't have higher authority when it comes to interpretation of Quranic verses than Ibn Kathir. He's saying who have not reached the years of menstruation, their iddah is 3 months, like those in menopause. Guys, when people say you're not a scholar, or you do not speak Arabic, it doesn't matter, because you know who's a scholar? Ibn Kathir. You know who speaks Arabic? Ibn Kathir. I could just read the freaking interpretation of the scholar who knows Arabic. That's what I can do. I don't need to go understand Arabic inside out. His interpretation is there. I could just refer to the authority that you believe in. If you do not believe this authority or all these other authorities, which I'm going to refer to, which I'm going to show, then what the hell are you going to do? Are you going to go based on your own understanding? If you're going to go based on your understanding, then don't tell me that, Armin, you're not a scholar. Oh, Armin, you don't speak Arabic. Well, shut up. He does, Ibn Kathir does, and so do all these other people. Look at Al-Tabari, another main source, means the same applies to the iddah for girls who do not menstruate because they are too young. Okay, that's Al-Tabari. That's a major source. Not Tafsir Ibn Abbas. Okay, what about waiting period for those who do not have menstruation because they are too young? Again, because they are too young. That's another tafsir. Okay, another tafsir, because they're too young in age. Okay, so this one does it mention young here? Okay, it doesn't mention young, but it does mention yet. So the word of yet means that they're too young. Okay. Oh, here, let's do a Shia scholar, because there's always that somebody who will come and say that, Armin, these are Sunni scholars. You know, Shia Islam is the true Islam. We always have either one, right? Why don't you refer to the Shia scholars? Look at this. Well, this is Tabrisi. This guy is used, Sheikh Tabrisi. Yes, Tabrisi. This guy is thrown into my face by Shias. Guy is recognized and accepted by Shia Muslims everywhere. Okay, so if you are a Shia who wants to come out and say, like, Armin, you are trying to make Islam look bad because of this evil Sunnis interpretation of Islam, well, here's your guy. This is your main guy. When it comes to interpretation of Quranic verses. Just this one. And women who have not yet reached the age of menstruation, right? So again, this is talking about people who are too young to have their period. Oh, and also we have evidence from hadith. We have a lot of hadith, like hadith Sahih Bukhari, that shows that this is talking about women who are too young. But if we are opening the door to the hadith, we already have the hadith from Bukhari that showed Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old. So, but we also now have a lot of hadith that shows that this verse is specifically in the Quran is talking about women who haven't had their period yet. Okay, so there's a lot of hadith that refers to that as well. So yeah, if you are a Muslim who doesn't accept the tafsir but accept hadith, because this is Sahih Bukhari, right? Then there you go. The Sahih Bukhari also refers to these. See, it says not yet menstruated. Not yet menstruated, meaning that they're too young. So yeah, there you go. Oh, here's Sahih Muslim. Guys, Sahih Muslim is another source of hadith that if you do not accept as a Muslim, that means that you're now against all Islamic schools of thought. As a Sunni Muslim, if you don't accept Sahih Muslim, that means that all 4 Islamic schools of thought have now been destroyed by you. Okay? So it says it's permissible for the father to give the hand of his daughter in marriage when she is not fully grown up. This is Sahih Muslim. And he does that. He basically, this is his understanding, his interpretation, his conclusion from this verse. But let me actually look at some modern tafsirs and say, and again, by modern, we're talking like 1921 to 2018. So the iddah for those who haven't menstruated, meaning for being young. Okay, so this is even modern one. This guy died in 2018, right? So he says his interpretation is meaning for being young. These are respected scholars that are recognized by Muslims worldwide, Muslims who study Islam. All of them agree. Here's the thing. Here's the interesting thing. When it comes to tafsirs, so we have some fringe reformist Muslims who are saying that this is not talking about women who are too young, women who are so young who don't have their menstruation, right? But these are just fringe activists who are trying to misrepresent what Islam stands for. But when it comes to tafsirs, all of them agree. All of them agree that this is referring to people who are too young to have their period. This is done. This is the end of. This should be the end of Islam. This, what I just told you, should be the end of Islam. Why is it not? When it comes to value judgments and ethics, there aren't that many things that most people agree on. I mean, there are, but not something as aggressively as this. Most of the modern world agrees that sex with children is bad. And Islam very clearly teaches that according to 99.9999% of anybody who has ever interpreted the Quran. And only recently we have some people who are saying this this is not talking about women who are so young, who are basically children. And these people, even if they were right, which they're not, that means your God is a moron who sends a verse that is so harmful to children without clarifying what it means, what he means. If this Quranic verse was not talking about children, why do I need you to explain that to me? Why such a verse that could so easily be interpreted as children not have a very small clarification, so that for 1400 years so many child marriages doesn't happen in Islam by Muslims? I mean, you saw the effect. The effect was an endorsement of RAPing children for hundreds of years. Why wouldn't you? Wouldn't it be an improvement to actually what these reformers are saying is worse for their God, because Islam is very, very clear to make in the claim that the Quran is a perfect message for all men and all time. When the reformers say that this verse is not talking about children, meaning that one line or one word could have made this verse more clear so that it was not harmful, not this harmful, and the Quran did not add that one word. Like, for example, I could have added with people like women with their condition, so that they have not had their period yet, or the sickness, or the, I don't know, disorder or something, the word disorder or something there that would make this clear. But it did not. That would be an improvement to the Quran. So what the reformers are saying is that the Quran could have been improved upon. And if you say that, that actually destroys Islam to its core. Because if you say that my God endorses child marriage, that actually doesn't violate Islamic teaching. Yeah, actually, the reformers' argument destroys Islam more completely. Because if your God endorses child marriage, there is still some arguments that people make is that, well, who are you to say what is right and wrong? You are judging right and wrong based on your human understanding. I know that sounds vile, but that's the only remaining way for them to keep Islam. They would say that it's God understands his creation, and you atheists, you lack ground to stand on to be able, because you have no morality to begin with. You are in no position to judge what is right or wrong. If Allah tells us that child marriage is okay and having sex with children is okay, it might sound disgusting to you, but who should we trust, the creation or the creator? Obviously the creator understands what is right and what is wrong more than the creation, right? So even though Islam will be evil, but with their philosophical mindset, they will still be able to keep it. But the reformist argument will destroy Islam completely, because the reformist argument is suggesting that the Quran said something that could have been improved upon if it added one word. That would basically completely challenge the divinity of Allah entirely. That would leave no room for God, Allah, to even be God. Thank you for being a member. Our membership has grown very significantly in the past month or two. So because of that, I'm going to do more member-only streams to show my appreciation. So this works. This is a win-win, because I wanted to do certain streams that I don't think is going to be received that well. So this is a way for me to be able to get those things out there. I'll just do it privately with members only. And also it's a good way to show appreciation to people who are members and are supporting the channel. So yeah, it's a win-win for all of us. Anyways, guys, I'm going to go. Thank you for being here. Till next stream. Bye.